I hadn't been to the old barn in years. It was my grandfather's, an aging wooden relic from a time when life seemed simpler. Jenna, my wife, had often joked about turning it into a studio for her paintings, but like so many things in our marriage, the idea had fallen to the wayside. That day, I wasn't there for renovations or nostalgia. I was cleaning it out to sell the land, hoping to close a chapter of my life that had grown increasingly suffocating. Dust danced in the afternoon sunlight, streaming through cracks in the walls. The air was thick with the smell of old hay and damp wood. I was sorting through a pile of rotting crates when I noticed something tucked away in the shadows, an old suitcase. It looked out of place, the leather scuffed but intact, its brass latches tarnished. My curiosity piqued. I pulled it into the light and popped it open. Inside, I found a collection of photos, letters, and receipts. At first, I thought they were keepsakes from my grandfather's time, but as I sifted through them, my hands began to tremble. The photos were recent, pictures of Jenna laughing in a hotel room, her head tilted toward a man I didn't recognize. He was younger, with a smug grin and arms wrapped possessively around her. The letters were worse, filled with intimate details of their encounters and cruel admissions of her boredom with me. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The barn spun around me, my breathing shallow and ragged. My hands clenched into fists, crumpling the papers. I wanted to scream, but the emptiness of the barn swallowed my voice. This suitcase, this treasure chest of betrayal, had been sitting here, hidden in a place I'd considered sacred, while I'd been living a lie. In that moment, I realized two things. My marriage was over, and Jenna had underestimated me. I sat in the barn for what felt like hours, staring at the suitcase and its contents spread across the dusty floor. Each item screamed betrayal, but the letters, her words, written in her hand, cut the deepest. "You make me feel alive in ways I never thought possible," she had written to him in one letter. To him, not me. Not the man who had supported her through sleepless nights when she doubted herself. Not the man who sacrificed his own dreams so she could chase hers. To him, my grip tightened on the paper, and for a moment, I thought I might tear it apart. But no, destroying evidence wasn't the answer. If she could hide this, what else had she buried beneath her charming, disarming smile? I gathered everything back into the suitcase and locked it shut, my mind whirring with questions. Where had she hidden the key? Why leave the evidence at all? Did she think I'd never find it? Or worse, did she simply not care? By the time I stepped out of the barn, the sun had begun its descent, painting the horizon in hues of amber and blood red. Fitting, I thought bitterly. Blood red, like the rage simmering in my chest. Jenna was home when I walked in, humming softly as she cooked dinner. The smell of roasted chicken filled the kitchen, a comforting aroma that now made my stomach churn. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her move around the kitchen like nothing was wrong, like she wasn't living a double life. She turned and smiled when she noticed me. "You're back." I was starting to worry. Her voice was light, airy, the same voice she used when she wanted to disarm me. I set the suitcase down on the table with a heavy thud. The sound made her pause, her eyes flickering to it, and then back to me. Her smile faltered. "What's that?" she asked, her tone forcefully casual. I stepped closer, my gaze never leaving hers. "Why don't you tell me?" Her brow furrowed, and for the briefest moment, I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. But she recovered quickly, putting on the mask she wore so well. "I have no idea what you're talking about. Is that from the barn? You've been cleaning all day." "Cut the act, Jenna." My voice was low, steady, but the undercurrent of anger was unmistakable. "I found your little stash. The photos, the letters, the receipts, everything." The color drained from her face. For a moment, I thought she might faint. Instead, she gripped the counter behind her, her knuckles white. "I can explain," she started, her voice trembling. "It's not what you think." "Don't." The word came out sharp, cutting through her excuses before they could take root. "I don't want to hear your lies, Jenna. Not anymore." She opened her mouth to respond but closed it again, her eyes darting to the suitcase like it might explode. For the first time, I saw her mask truly crack. Beneath the confident exterior was fear. Fear of losing control, of losing the life she'd so carefully curated. "Who is he?" I demanded, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. "How long has this been going on?" Her silence was deafening. I slammed my hand on the table, making her jump. "Answer me, Jenna. Who is he?" Finally, she met my gaze. Her eyes were cold now, defiant. "It doesn't matter," she said, her voice steady but devoid of remorse. "You're not going to do anything about it." For a moment, her audacity left me speechless. She folded her arms across her chest, her posture challenging. "You're not going to leave me," she continued, her tone dripping with disdain. "You're too weak for that. And even if you did, you'd lose everything. This house, your reputation. You think anyone would believe you over me?" Her words hit me like a slap. Weak. That's how she saw me. Not a partner, not a husband, just a convenient fool she could manipulate. She smiled then, a cruel, calculating smile that made my blood boil. "So, go ahead," she said, gesturing to the suitcase. "Throw your tantrum. But at the end of the day, we both know you won't do a thing." I took a step back, stunned by her arrogance. She truly believed she held all the cards. But as I looked at her, standing there so smugly, something shifted inside me. "You're right," I said softly, my voice steady now. "I won't do anything tonight." Her smile faltered. "What does that mean?" "It means you should enjoy your dinner, Jenna." I picked up the suitcase and started toward the door. "Because this will be the last time you feel in control." I left her standing in the kitchen, her confident facade cracking under the weight of my words. For the first time, I felt a glimmer of power, a sense that I wasn't just a victim in this. The storm was coming, and Jenna had no idea what I had planned. The night was quiet, but my mind was a hurricane. I sat in my car at the end of the driveway, the suitcase perched on the passenger seat, a constant reminder of Jenna's betrayal. Her words played over and over in my head. "You're too weak for that. You won't do anything." Weak. The word burned. She thought she had me pegged, that she could manipulate me into submission. But she underestimated the depth of my resolve and my anger. This wasn't going to be a rash confrontation. No shouting matches or flailing threats. If she wanted control, I'd take it from her piece by piece. I drove aimlessly at first, my hands gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white. By the time I pulled into an empty parking lot behind an old diner, my mind was clear, focused. I opened the suitcase again, spreading its contents across the seat. The photos, letters, and receipts were all there, staring back at me like silent accusations. But they weren't just reminders of her deceit. They were tools, evidence. I grabbed my phone and started taking pictures of everything, methodically cataloging every detail. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was calculating. If Jenna wanted to play dirty, I'd beat her at her own game. By the time I got home, it was well past midnight. The house was dark, the only sound the creak of the floorboards beneath my feet as I entered. Jenna was already in bed, her steady breathing the soundtrack to my quiet preparations. I set the suitcase down in the spare room, locking the door behind me. Then I got to work. First, I pulled out my laptop. If Jenna thought she could hide her secrets, she was wrong. I knew enough about her routines to start piecing together her web of lies. She was predictable in her carelessness, using the same password for everything. Her birthday. Within minutes, I had access to her email and bank accounts. What I found confirmed what the letters had hinted at: hotel bookings, unexplained withdrawals, and a second email account she used to communicate with him. It wasn't just one affair. It was a pattern. Different cities, different men. All while I'd been at home waiting for her. I saved everything, every damning detail, onto a hard drive. This wasn't just about confronting her. It was about making sure she couldn't escape the consequences of her actions. She wanted to play games, and I was more than willing to play, but by my rules. The next morning, Jenna was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs. She was dressed for the day, her hair and makeup perfect, as if nothing had happened. She looked up from her coffee and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning," she said, her tone saccharine sweet. "Morning," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. She was watching me, trying to gauge my mood, but I didn't give her anything. Let her wonder. "I thought we could talk," she said, leaning against the counter. "About last night." I sipped my coffee and shrugged. "Nothing to talk about." Her brow furrowed. "Nothing? After what you said?" I met her gaze, letting my silence speak volumes. She wanted me to crack, to show my hand, but I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" she called after me. "Out," I said without looking back. My first stop was a lawyer's office. I didn't want a messy confrontation. I wanted a strategy. If Jenna thought I'd sit back and let her walk all over me, she was in for a rude awakening. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Carla, listened intently as I laid out the situation, showing her the evidence I'd collected. "You've got a solid case," Carla said, flipping through the photos and documents. "This will work in your favor if you decide to file for divorce." "Not just yet," I replied. "I want to gather more." She raised an eyebrow. "More? You already have enough to?" "I want airtight proof," I interrupted. "Something she can't spin. She thinks she's untouchable. I want her to know she's not." Carla nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I can help you with that, but you need to be careful. Don't let her suspect anything." "I won't," I said, standing. "This isn't just about the divorce. It's about making sure she knows she's not in control anymore." That night, I returned home, the wheels of my plan fully in motion. Jenna was in the living room, scrolling through her phone, her expression neutral as I walked past her. I didn't stop to engage, didn't give her any clue about what I was planning. But as I climbed the stairs, I felt her gaze on my back. She was watching me, suspicious now, trying to figure out what was going on. Good. Let her wonder. She had no idea what was coming. I spent the next few days pretending everything was fine. It wasn't easy. Every time Jenna smiled at me, every time she laughed at something on TV or brushed past me in the hallway, I felt the anger simmering beneath my calm exterior. But I kept my face neutral, my voice steady. If she wanted to play house, I could play too, for now. At night, I would retreat to the spare room, the suitcase still tucked away in the closet. It had become my war room. The evidence I'd collected was neatly organized on my laptop, and every evening I added more. Bank transactions, phone records, social media messages. It all painted a damning picture of a woman who had lied to me for months, maybe years. And then I found the video. It was buried deep in one of her email folders, hidden behind innocuous file names. I almost didn't click on it, but when I did, the truth hit me like a freight train. There she was, Jenna, in a hotel room, her hair tousled, her smile coy. She was talking to the man I'd seen in the photos, her tone light and teasing as she leaned closer to the camera. "You wish you were here, don't you?" she said, her voice dripping with flirtation. "I miss you so much. Can't wait until next week." The video ended abruptly, but the damage was done. My stomach churned as I stared at the screen, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't just betrayal. It was deliberate, premeditated, and flaunted like a trophy. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I watched the video over and over, each viewing solidifying my resolve. Jenna wanted to live her life as if I didn't exist. Fine, but she would feel my presence soon enough. The next morning, I sat across from Jenna at the breakfast table. She was scrolling through her phone, sipping her coffee, oblivious to the storm brewing on my side of the table. I waited until she looked up, her eyes meeting mine. "Busy today?" I asked casually. She blinked, caught off guard by the question. Not really. Just running some errands." "Why?" "Just curious." I smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Maybe we could do something together later." Her hesitation was telling. "Oh, maybe. I'll let you know." I nodded, the mask firmly in place. "Sure. Let me know." As she got up to leave, I followed her to the door, watching as she grabbed her purse and slipped on her shoes. "Have a good day," I said, my tone almost too pleasant. She paused, her hand on the doorknob, and glanced back at me. There was something in her eyes, suspicion, maybe, but she didn't say anything. She simply smiled and walked out, the door clicking shut behind her. As soon as she was gone, I went to work. The GPS tracker I'd planted in her car a few nights ago showed her heading toward the city. I followed from a distance, keeping my car several blocks behind hers. She didn't make any unexpected stops, driving straight to a small boutique hotel downtown. I parked across the street, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I watched her get out of the car. She was dressed casually, jeans, a sweater, her hair pulled back, but there was a spring in her step that I hadn't seen in months. It made my blood boil. A few minutes later, a man joined her in the lobby. Him. The man from the photos, the video. They embraced, her arms wrapping around his neck, his hand resting possessively on her lower back. I grabbed my phone, snapping a series of photos through the windshield. The proof was undeniable now. They disappeared into the hotel, and I sat there, my mind racing. This wasn't just about documenting her infidelity anymore. It was about taking back control, about making sure she felt the weight of what she had done, not just to me, but to the life we'd built together. That evening, when Jenna came home, she was glowing. Her cheeks were flushed, her smile wide as she kissed me on the cheek. "Good day?" I asked, my voice calm. She nodded, setting her purse down. "Busy, but productive." I watched her as she moved around the kitchen, pretending to tidy up. She was a master of deception, but I'd seen behind the curtain, and soon, she would realize that I wasn't the man she thought she could manipulate. As I headed upstairs, I glanced back at her one last time. She didn't notice the coldness in my eyes, the storm gathering just beneath the surface. The facade was cracking, and when it finally shattered, Jenna wouldn't know what hit her. The next few days were a balancing act of patience and preparation. I went about my routines, playing the part of the oblivious husband while tightening the noose around Jenna's lies. The evidence I'd collected was comprehensive now, airtight, but it wasn't enough to expose her. I wanted more. I wanted her to feel the weight of her betrayal in a way that left no doubt of her culpability. On a hunch, I decided to bait her. "Hey, Jenna," I said one evening, my tone light as we sat on the couch. She was scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging me. She replied, her eyes glued to the screen. "I was thinking, maybe we should take a trip. Just the two of us. Get away for a bit." She glanced up at me, surprised. "A trip? Where did that come from?" "I don't know," I said with a shrug. "It feels like we've been drifting lately. I thought it might be nice to reconnect." Her reaction was exactly what I'd expected. She hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line as she carefully chose her words. "That sounds nice, but things are really busy for me right now. Maybe in a few weeks?" "Sure," I said, forcing a smile. "Whenever works for you." She returned to her phone, her expression unreadable, but I could see the wheels turning. She didn't want to say no outright, it would draw suspicion, but the idea of spending an entire weekend alone with me was clearly the last thing she wanted. I knew what she was really thinking. She needed time to adjust her lies, to ensure her little rendezvous wouldn't be interrupted, and that gave me the opening I needed. The next day, I called Carla, my lawyer. "It's time to push," I told her. She listened carefully as I explained my plan. "Are you sure you want to go this route? Once you start, there's no going back." "I'm sure," I said. "This isn't just about divorce. It's about making her understand she can't walk all over me." Carla agreed to move forward, and by the end of the call, everything was in motion. Jenna wouldn't see it coming. That evening, I decided to test her. "By the way," I said casually over dinner, "I might be heading out of town for a few days next week. Work's sending me to a conference." Jenna looked up from her plate, her fork halfway to her mouth. "Oh, where to?" "Chicago," I lied. "Should be gone by Wednesday." Her reaction was subtle, but I caught it. The slight widening of her eyes, the way she quickly masked her expression with a forced smile. "That's great. When will you be back?" "Friday night. It's just a short trip." She nodded, her demeanor almost too casual. "Well, I hope it goes well." I smiled to myself. She had taken the bait. The next few days confirmed my suspicions. Jenna's behavior shifted, her phone glued to her hand more than usual. She started leaving the room to take calls, her excuses flimsy at best. By Tuesday night, she was distracted, her attention elsewhere as she absent-mindedly flipped through a magazine. "You seem preoccupied," I said, my tone light. "Just tired," she replied, not meeting my gaze. I didn't press her. Let her think she was getting away with it. By the time I left for Chicago on Wednesday morning, she was practically buzzing with anticipation. What she didn't know was that I wasn't going anywhere. That evening, I parked my car a few blocks away from the house, waiting in the shadows. Jenna had left shortly after I departed, her car speeding down the street without a second glance. I followed her at a safe distance, my hands steady on the wheel. She drove to the same boutique hotel as before. My stomach churned as I watched her meet him in the lobby, their embrace lingering just a little too long. This time, they didn't even bother with pretense. They headed straight for the elevator, disappearing together. I parked and entered the hotel, my heart pounding. The front desk clerk barely glanced at me as I made my way to the stairwell, climbing up to the floor where they'd vanished. I didn't need to see them again. I already knew what they were doing. Instead, I placed a small recording device near their door and quietly left. The next morning, Jenna was back home, cheerful as ever. She greeted me with a kiss when I returned from my trip that evening, her smile radiant. "How was Chicago?" she asked, her tone breezy. "Exhausting," I replied, "but productive." She nodded, her mask firmly in place. I could almost admire her dedication to the lie if it hadn't been so infuriating. As she turned away, I allowed myself a small smile. The bait had been set, and she'd walked right into the trap. Now, it was time to spring it. The day after my return, I kept my distance. Jenna spent most of her time pretending everything was normal, smiling at me with that same disarming charm that had once made me love her. Now, it only fueled my disgust. Her phone buzzed occasionally, and though she kept it angled away from me, her quick glances and faint smiles betrayed her. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Timing was everything. On Saturday morning, Jenna announced she was heading out to meet Monica for coffee. I hid my smirk behind my coffee cup. "That sounds nice," I said. "Tell Monica I said hi." She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly as if sensing something off in my tone. "Will do," she replied before quickly leaving the room. I watched her pull out of the driveway, my heart pounding as I reached for the suitcase I had carefully stashed in the spare room. Today was the day. By the time Jenna returned that afternoon, I had transformed the living room into a gallery of her deceit. Every piece of evidence I'd gathered, the photos, letters, receipts, screenshots, and even the printed emails, was laid out on the coffee table. I'd arranged the photos in a neat grid, the letters fanned out like playing cards. At the center was my laptop, ready to play the video I'd found. She walked in, her keys jingling as she set them on the counter. "Hey, I grabbed some pastries." Her voice faltered as she turned the corner and saw the display. Her smile vanished, replaced by a pale, wide-eyed stare. What is this?" I stood from the couch, my arms crossed. "This," I said, gesturing to the evidence, "is everything you've been hiding from me. Everything you thought I was too stupid to find." Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked at the table, then back at me, her eyes darting like a cornered animal. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice wavering. "Oh, you don't?" I said, picking up a photo of her wrapped around him. "Then maybe you can explain this. Or these." I held up the printed emails, her words practically dripping with infidelity. "How about we watch a little video?" Her hand shot out. "Don't." "Why not?" I challenged, my voice rising. "Afraid I'll see you for what you really are?" She tried to grab the laptop, but I was faster, pulling it out of reach. "Don't you dare turn this around on me, Jenna. Don't you dare try to make this about anything other than your lies." Her composure shattered. "I can explain." "Explain?" I barked, slamming the laptop shut. "Explain what, Jenna? That you've been screwing around behind my back? That you've turned our marriage into a joke? Go ahead. Explain." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Instead, tears welled in her eyes. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. "Hurt me?" I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You didn't just hurt me, Jenna. You destroyed me. You lied to me. Betrayed me, and for what? Him? I pointed to the photos on the table. A man who doesn't even have the decency to look me in the eye. Her tears spilled over, but I didn't feel pity. Not anymore. She reached for my arm, but I stepped back, the distance between us a chasm she couldn't cross. I didn't want this, she sobbed. I didn't want us to end. You ended us the moment you let him into your life, I said coldly. You don't get to cry now, Jenna. You don't get to play the victim. For a long moment, she stood there, her shoulders heaving as she tried to compose herself. Then, like a switch flipping, her tears stopped. Her expression hardened, her eyes narrowing. So, what now? She said, her tone icy. You've had your little moment. Are you going to throw me out? Take everything? Go ahead, John. See how far you get. You think anyone will believe you? That anyone will side with you? Her audacity took my breath away, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that made her falter. Oh, I'm not throwing you out, I said. Not yet. What's that supposed to mean? She snapped. It means you're going to feel what it's like to lose control, I said, my voice calm and steady. You think you hold all the cards, Jenna? Think again. I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a whisper. You're going to stay here, in this house, with me? And every time you look at me, every time you close your eyes, you're going to remember this moment. You're going to remember that you're the reason everything fell apart. Her eyes widened, but I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked upstairs, leaving her alone with the evidence of her betrayal. That night, I slept in the spare room again, but I didn't feel anger. I felt power. For the first time in months, I was in control. The trap had sprung, and Jenna was caught. The next few days were a masterclass in tension. Jenna oscillated between anger and despair, her demeanor shifting with every interaction. Sometimes she tried to act as if nothing had changed, fixing dinner and making small talk. Other times, she glared at me, her eyes filled with venom. I gave her nothing in return. No arguments, no apologies, no signs of reconciliation. I wanted her to feel the weight of my silence, to stew in the consequences of her actions. Every time I walked into her room, she tensed, waiting for me to say something, to lash out. But I never did. The day I met with her lover's wife, everything changed. Her name was Rebecca, and she'd been just as blindsided as I was when I showed her the evidence. At first, she was in denial, but as I laid everything out, the photos, the emails, the video, her face crumpled. I had no idea, she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. He said he was working late. I believed him. I didn't tell her to leave him or give her advice on what to do. That wasn't my place. But when she asked if I planned to confront him, I told her I had a better idea. The next weekend, Jenna hosted a small dinner party. She'd planned it weeks ago, before everything came to light, and insisted we go through with it to maintain appearances. I agreed, but not for the reasons she thought. Halfway through the evening, I excused myself, returning moments later with the suitcase. Placing it in the center of the table, I opened it with a flourish. The room fell silent as our guests stared at the evidence spilling out, photos, letters, receipts. Jenna's face turned ashen. This, I said calmly, is what my wife has been doing behind my back. The room erupted. Jenna stammered, trying to explain, but the damage was done. Her friends left in a flurry of awkward excuses, their judgmental whispers following her as she fled to the kitchen. The following week, Jenna received a letter from Carla. It outlined the divorce proceedings in excruciating detail, my intention to keep the house, the evidence supporting my case, and the financial repercussions of her actions. Jenna was livid. "You're ruining my life," she screamed, throwing the letter at me. "No," I replied coldly. "You ruined your life. I'm just making sure you feel it." Rebecca and I kept in touch. She was grateful for my honesty and eager to help me expose her husband. Together, we compiled even more evidence, messages between him and Jenna that painted an even darker picture of their affair. It wasn't just about physical betrayal. They had planned to leave us both, using our savings to start a new life. The audacity left me seething. On a crisp Friday evening, I orchestrated the final blow. With Rebecca's help, I lured Jenna and her lover to the same hotel they'd frequented. Rebecca and I waited in the parking lot until they arrived, then followed them inside. The confrontation was swift and brutal. Rebecca threw the printed emails at her husband, her voice shaking with rage. I didn't say a word to Jenna. I didn't need to. The look on her face as she realized we had outmaneuvered her was satisfaction enough. Jenna moved out the following week. I made sure her departure was as humiliating as possible, scheduling the movers during peak neighborhood hours. She avoided my gaze as she carried the last of her things to the car, her once proud demeanor reduced to ashes. I didn't say goodbye. I simply watched as she drove away, her taillights disappearing down the street. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork and healing. The divorce was finalized quickly, thanks to the mountain of evidence I'd collected. Jenna tried to negotiate for more, but Carla shut her down at every turn. For the first time in years, I felt free. The house was quiet, but it wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. I spent my days cleaning, redecorating, and rediscovering the person I'd been before Jenna's lies consumed my life. Months later, I received a letter from Jenna. It was short and bitter, blaming me for everything that had happened. She claimed I'd destroyed her life, that I'd turned everyone against her. I didn't bother replying. Instead, I tossed the letter in the fireplace, watching the flames consume her words as a smile spread across my face. She had underestimated me, but she wouldn't make that mistake again. I'd rebuilt my life from the ashes she'd left behind, and I was stronger for it. The man she betrayed was gone, replaced by someone she could never manipulate again. And as I stood there, watching the fire die down, I felt nothing but relief. The storm was over, and I had won.